This week's episode is sponsored by Logitech.
You're listening to the B&H Photography Podcast. For 50 years, B&H has been the professional source for photography, video, audio, and more. For your favorite gear, news, and reviews, visit us at bnh.com or download the B&H app to your iPhone or Android device. Now here's your host, Alan Weitz.
Greetings and welcome to the B&H Photography Podcast. My name is Alan Weitz.
And I'm Jill Waterman.
New York City is the ultimate melting pot. It's a place where it sometimes seems as if everybody you run into is struggling to forge a path by whatever means necessary. Yet the bright lights of Gotham wickedly conspire against the city's impossibly small geographic footprint, which puts the squeeze on habitable living space, particularly for artists. In today's show, we look at the opposite ends of this struggle for prized space with two photographers who've documented divergent mini worlds. And wouldn't you know it, they both happen to be named Josh, and they're good friends. Double hitter there. But before we introduce them, a request from all of us to all of you. If you enjoy listening to our show, and we know you do, please take a moment to rate us on Apple Podcasts, write us a review, and definitely share your favorite episodes with friends. We love doing the show, and your feedback helps us make every episode that much better. Now, back to some background on our guests. Joshua Charow is a New York City-based filmmaker and photographer. He escaped from suburban New Jersey at age 15 in the quest to climb skyscrapers and walk subway tunnels while photographing the city's beautiful hidden locations. These experiences were his introduction to the arts and informed his style of jumping into the unknown with a camera in hand. Charow spent the last 3 years documenting an exclusive group of artists who have lived and worked under the protection of the 1982 Loft Law for more than 40 years now. This groundbreaking legislation granted protection and rent stabilization to thousands of artists living illegally in commercially zoned lofts across Manhattan. I might add that when I went to SVA back in the early 70s, half of my instructors lived in these illegal lofts between Midtown, let's say 34th Street, south, all the way to downtown. I remember all this really well. And when this legislation passed, it really was a big deal. Anyway, his first photography book, Loft Law, the last of New York City's original artist lofts, is published by Damiani Books and is being accompanied by his debut exhibition, Loft Law, Photographs by Joshua Charow, opening at Westwood Gallery in New York on May 16th. The show will include more than 30 of Charow's photographs alongside select artwork by artists featured in his Loft Law series. That's a great way of doing a show. I think it's a wonderful idea. Our second guest, Josh Katz, is a documentary photographer, photo educator, and sponsored skateboarder living in Brooklyn. He creates digital photography courses, leads workshops, and makes videos for Canon, teaches Lightroom for Adobe, and shoots YouTube videos about photography. Outside of his professional vocations, his hobbies include talking to strangers, designing scavenger hunts, baking homemade energy bars, biking the city, reading about anthropology, urban planning, and American history. He's also trying to visit every U.S. national park. In March 2020, after New York City copped the crown as one of the top official pandemic hotbeds, Katz made a beeline from his cramped apartment to the roof, only to discover a thriving community of neighbors starting to gather across the shared space of 17 adjacent buildings. During the months that followed, he spent hundreds of hours photographing the rise of roof culture in his Bushwick neighborhood. His first book, On the Roof, New York in Quarantine, was published by Thames and Hudson in November 2021 with the help of a viral Kickstarter campaign. Joshua Charow and Josh Katz, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having us.
Thanks for having us.
So we have Joshua Charow and Josh Katz. So what we're going to do is Joshua Charow will be Joshua, and Josh Katz will be Josh. And that's how we're going to separate. Unless I get tired, and then I'll just call you Mr. Charow and Mr. Katz. We'll just confuse everybody. Okay, so let's start with a question for both of you. When we first hatched the idea of pairing your projects together for today's episode, we had zero idea that you guys actually were very close friends. How did you first meet up?
Josh, I was looking this up today, and I have the date, 2011.
Wow, that's amazing.
We've known each other from the internet long before we'd actually met up. We were both making skateboarding videos on YouTube. But when I came to college in New York, Josh hit me up, and we've been skating and shooting and scheming ever since, and that was 2014.
Cool. Joshua, for the sake of clarity, let's first get overviews of each of your projects. And Josh, we're going to start with you. How did you first learn about the New York City Loft Law? Because this is before your time. And what inspired you to take a deep breath and turn this into a deep dive photo project?
Sure. So when I was a teenager, I used to come into New York City and climb skyscrapers and shoot photographs from rooftops across New York. And a building that I would go to all the time was this former matzah factory in South Williamsburg, Brooklyn. And we would take this rusty old freight elevator and it would open on the top floor and just have the most incredible factory window overlooking Lower Manhattan skyline. And it was an artist loft building, so it was pretty easy to get into. So it just became one of those places that I would come back to. When I got a little bit older, I was probably 22, I was looking for a new apartment. And being a little younger and a little naive, I remembered this building. I thought it would be a perfect place to get a photo studio because of the incredible windows and because of the view of the city. So I looked up the building online and I couldn't find too much. So I went to the building in person and I met a tenant who was leaving the building. And they explained to me that there were only a few people left in the building because they were protected by this thing called the Loft Law. So that was really the first time I learned about it. I did more research on the Loft Law, and I realized that this image I had in my head, I think an image that a lot of people who grew up outside of New York City have, that you can be a sort of struggling painter and live in this vast loft with columns and tin ceilings. It actually still exists. Very, very rarely, but they do still exist in New York. And for the most part, they're protected by the Loft Law. So I became sort of obsessed with this idea of photographing the remaining lofts and artists around the city protected by this law. And the first thing I did was I found a map of the remaining buildings that had protection. But the issue with the map was that it didn't have unit numbers, it didn't have names, it just had the address of the building. So that sort of started the journey. I printed out hundreds of flyers and I set out on foot to ring as many doorbells as I could. And if someone answered, then I would try and pitch them the project I was doing, explain why I thought it was important to photograph these spaces while they're still here. And hopefully they would let me up and we could meet and schedule a time to take their photos.
Now, by the way, for our listeners who have never been to Manhattan, I just want to explain this, that Manhattan is an island made up of a whole bunch of very small, quaint cottages. So it's very easy just to go up and knock on a door and speak to the people that live there, okay? So it's not really no, no, obviously, this is an immense project. You literally went around the city ringing on buzzers, trying to locate the original Loft Law artists to document this thing. How receptive were people to this kind of a cold call pitch? And I'm just curious, as an icebreaker, did you ever start the conversation by saying something like, I've been trying to contact you about your auto insurance or an old college loan? If somebody rings your doorbell in New York City, it's like the first thing you do is pull a gun.
It was a challenge. And I think you have a window of about 15 seconds to get someone's attention before they just ignore you and the buzzer. And so the Loft Law was originally passed in 1982. So to hear someone show up at your door and mention something that you might have fought for decades ago, I think is an interesting way to catch your attention.
That's true. It's like bringing a prohibition. That's an interesting. No, seriously, it's an interesting point because it shows that you're not just some Yahoo randomly knocking on doors. You have a reason to be there, and it's something that greatly affected their life. So that's actually a good hook. It really is.
Exactly. And I think it could go either way. It could possibly be a scary thing to hear, but this became something that I really had to workshop, how to prove to them that I was doing a project that I thought this was something that was important to capture and that I was there because I cared about this culture and these spaces and these people. So it was challenging, and it was a very low percentage of people who actually answered and let me up. I rang probably thousands of doorbells, especially because some buildings might have 40 units. And if there's 2 people that are still left from the 1982 Loft Law, then I've rang all 40 units to maybe get to the 1 or 2. So even if I got 5 out of 100 doorbells that I rang in one day, that could lead me to maybe a tenant who knows their neighbor who's under the loft law, who could give me an email, or maybe one person would let me up and they weren't interested, but they had a friend who might be interested. So it was a long process and it wasn't straightforward. But at the end of the day, the more I did it, the more people would refer me to their friends and other people they knew that were in lofts. So it became much easier as time went on.
Is it safe to assume that, again, when this all happened way back when, this was a tight group of people because they were working as a unit to get this law passed? So they had to cooperate. They had to know. They all knew each other because they couldn't just do this individually. What about now? Is there still a grouping of some of the original people? And also, is this law, is it a grandfather law where say these people who are getting on in years right now, can they sell it and could the new occupants take advantage of the pricing, or is it a one-shot deal that once they're gone or leave the loft, it becomes, open season for whoever wants to pay the most for it?
I'll start with your second question. So the loft can be passed down to the tenant's children if they live there for 3 years prior to the original tenant living. So what you'll get in some of these lofts is sometimes their children live with them as well. And if they ever decide they want to leave or if they pass away, then their children can take over the space.
As long as they've been there themselves for 3 years.
Yes, exactly.
Interesting.
Is it basically the same as rent stabilization that exists for regular apartments?
Yes.
Is that provision the same?
Exactly. That's the same rule. If the tenant leaves and they don't have children or a spouse, then the loft returns to market rate or whatever the landlord wants to charge for it. So unfortunately, the protection does not get passed on to new tenants the same way rent stabilization does. But the third option is that the landlord can offer to buy out the tenant and say, I'm going to offer you this sum of money for you to leave. And then the landlord charges whatever they want once they're gone. So I spoke to a few people who had gotten those offers as well.
And how many of these people today still know each other from the old battle? I mean, when we say you met somebody who actually let you come into their place and you sold them on the deal and they go, this is great. By the way, I know 12 other people who would probably be interested. Did that happen at all?
Unfortunately, no one had 12 other people for me, but I would basically go through the process and photograph and interview each person. And then at the end of the session, I would ask if they knew anyone else. And for the most part, I would say a lot of artists knew maybe one or two other friends who are still in their lofts. The amount of people who said, I wish you would come 10 years ago, 20 years ago.
Oh, sure.
Because I had so many friends who are still in their lofts. So that makes me sad. But for the most part, everyone still knew one or two people. And what ended up happening was I would photograph someone, I would interview them, and I would hear something they said that sounded familiar. And I would give them the list of other artists I photographed. And they would say, oh, wow, I haven't heard this person's name in 20 years. Or I used to go to this person's loft for painting. We would paint together in the 70s. So there were still people that knew about each other, but hadn't seen each other in decades. So I'm really looking forward to the gallery show in a few weeks to hopefully see some of these people see each other again after decades.
Yeah, cement the connections. That's great.
Well, it's like before we started recording, we had a brief conversation that I actually knew one of the people in your book, and I haven't seen this person for 50 years. It's nice to know he's still alive.
No, it's unbelievable. And almost every time I would photograph someone, I would tell them some other names that they recognized and were close with at one point in time. So it's amazing that these people have had the resilience to still make a life here as the city has changed so much.
What was the time frame you were photographing? Was it before or after COVID? Obviously not during the worst of it, but...
The time frame was from late 2021 up until now. The last photographs taken for the book were in October, but even now I'm still continuing this series. Still interested in it, and I'll still do it as long as I meet new people who are here.
Cool.
But I do remember when I first started ringing doorbells, it was the early whisperings of Omicron in 2021. So there were a few people that gave me an email and said, hey, let's talk in a few months when things calm down.
Back into the hole again.
Yeah.
Around how many artists did you contact in all, and what percentage made it into the book?
So I spoke to hundreds of people. I ended up photographing about 75 different artists, and the book has 30 different artists in it.
Interesting. And what kind of criteria did you use to narrow it down? I mean, obviously you have to do editing, and not everybody can get in, but was it a visual or story background, or a combination of the two that determined, who makes it and who didn't?
That's a good question. The things that I really had to consider were, one, I wanted to show the range and diversity of arts that you get in these spaces. I mean, it's unbelievable the different mediums that are being created in these lofts. So there was a 3D photographer that I met. There was a man who is a robot maker. He literally has made hundreds of robots in his loft. There is a sculptor with a 20-foot sculpture of a necklace hanging from her ceiling. And there are countless painters. The artist on the cover, Steve Silver, has painted every inch of his floor rainbow tiles. So I wanted to show just the incredible range of worlds that these artists have created in these spaces. That was a huge thing that I had to consider when editing the book. The other thing that was very important was I wanted to be able to show the history of the Loft Law through some of these artists. So there are a few people in the book that were really integral to passing this legislation. One of them was Chuck Delaney, who was one of the founders of the Lower Manhattan Loft Tenants, a group that was established in the late 1970s and really pushed and lobbied up in Albany to get this law passed. And he's still in his loft today. So almost every artist that I photographed said, you have to photograph Chuck Delaney. There was another person I photographed named Bob Petrucci, who was a woodworker and a carpenter in the late 70s. And he joined the Lower Manhattan Loft Tenants. And he got really involved in fighting for this legislation, making sure that people could stay in their lofts. And he became so interested that he actually went to law school after the law was passed so that he could become a lawyer and fight for other artists to stay in their lofts. So,
Wow.
yeah. So there were so many artists that I photographed whose lawyer was Bob Petrucci, who is still in his incredible 16th floor loft overlooking the city, who has advocated for hundreds of artists over the past 30 years for this protection.
That's fabulous.
It's just unbelievable. So there were a lot of people like that who, for the narrative, I felt had to be included as well. So there were a few different things I had to juggle to figure out who would make the final book. But that was by far the most challenging part of this entire process, because I want to put everyone in there.
Wow. Out of all the artists that you met and photographed, do you have a particular favorite? I would imagine this would be kind of difficult because each one is just a unique character, for lack of better words. These are special people in many ways.
Yeah, it's an impossible question. And I really, really enjoyed my time with every single, selfishly, I just enjoyed talking and hanging with all these different artists. It was so fun. I'll give you two people that stick out. One of them, his name is Carmen Cicero. He is an abstract expressionist painter, and he's living on the Bowery, and he's 97 years old, and he definitely has more energy than I have. He he lives on the top of a 5th floor walk-up, and he is running across his loft, painting huge paintings still, and it's extremely inspirational to meet someone like that who's dedicated their entire life to their art practice and is still doing it today. So he's someone who I went back and photographed a few times. I actually just saw this past week, and he was wonderful. The one other story I'll give you is the last artist that I photographed for the book is a sculptor named Marcia Pells. And when I arrived at her front door, and this was part of the magic of the project, is that if I was referred to someone, then I had no idea what their space looked like. You couldn't look these things up online. So I showed up to a pretty nondescript 3-story brick building. And when she showed up at the door, I followed her. And instead of going into the building, we went to the back of it to a courtyard that was probably 100 feet long. And at the end of the courtyard was a literal warehouse with a 20-foot door, which is Marcia's front door. And she lives in a former glass factory that was built in the 1850s with 20-foot ceilings. She is a sculptor who works in very large form. So her sculptures are hanging from the ceiling. And it was just astounding to see. And she's a lovely artist and a lovely human too. So that was a really special one to end the photographic process on.
That sounds amazing. Yeah, one of the takeaways, and by the way, I have to add that aside from the fact that you did still photography, some of the video that you shot is really remarkable. You do video very well. The interviews are great. The people get to really step out and be who they are, and you're capturing the environment that they're in. And that's one of my big takeaways from this is that one of the things I loved about going through the book and looking at the videos that I remember when this was what a lot of space in Manhattan looked like for a lot of people. This was the norm. And when you look at loft spaces these days in books and magazines, they're stripped. Somebody went and gutted all this beautiful old stuff and put in all new sleek and modern and everything else. And that's great. I mean, it's all different ways of interpreting spaces. But what's beautiful about this is that this is all the original building, the tin ceilings, the beams, the pieces of, wood that you just can't get timber like this anymore. It's gone. It's all been used. And you get to review it. You get to see it again.
In most cases, when the artists were in the lofts, they were bare and the artists had to build things out themselves.
Yeah.
I mean, that was another aspect of the Loft Law, was that they were not really habitable spaces.
No, they were horrible. Just a little interjection. I was talking with Jill when we were preparing for the show, that back in the early 70s, we, with a group of friends, we went downtown. We were looking at a building. And I don't remember where it was. It was something down in Soho, not far from Chinatown. And we were looking at a building, a 4-story loft building, and there were 4 of us. And we could have basically had it for $100,000 each. We would have had our own floor. But this space was so raw. I mean, no electricity, no running, no nothing. This is raw space. And I remember my father-in-law at the time was a great guy. He was a VP at a major construction company in Manhattan. And, I always trusted him. And he looked at me and he goes, you're crazy. Go get yourself a townhouse in New Jersey. Same money. You'll be better off. Anyway, so we followed his advice, and I'm still kicking myself in the ass to this very day. I love the man. He was lovely to our family, great human being. But Henry, that was a bad piece of advice, my friend. You should have known better. But okay, that's another story. But yeah, it's a piece of history. Anyway.
I would love to talk about that briefly, is that this is such a romantic idea now that you live in this huge loft and you pay a little bit of money and you can make your art all day. And it is romantic in many ways. But the origins of this law were not like that. Like you guys are saying, these were raw spaces. Most people, when they came to their lofts, didn't have electricity, didn't have water. There was no kitchen.
They didn't take their coats off for 4 months.
Yes. These spaces were for manufacturing and commercial use.
Yeah.
So when the artists came in, because they were the only ones who would rent these spaces after industry mostly left Manhattan, they had to build everything. And that meant years of putting in their time, their money, and their lives into these spaces. So in the 70s, when loft living became more chic, when more people wanted to do this, the artists were the first ones to get kicked out. So the law was really a reaction to the artists who had put in years of their life and a lot of money to get to stay in these spaces when no one else saw the value and the lives that they could build in the spaces. So there were tough times, and it was dangerous too. There was 2 different artists I photographed whose buildings burnt down in the 60s and 70s, and they had to move somewhere else. So it wasn't always great conditions. The neighborhoods were very different in the early days.
And just keep in mind, the idea of artists doing plumbing and electricity is a very frightening thought. Yeah. And that's reality. I know it doesn't surprise me that some of these places actually burn down. But that also is what makes them so wonderful. All right, Joshua, we're going to give you a break right now. And Josh Katz, it's your turn. Your project was conceived as a creative solution to a really awful situation, namely the isolation and need to quarantine during COVID. In your book text, you write that you always enjoyed embracing limitations and that you find unexpected or overlooked situations allow you to be creative in ways that you never imagined. And again, it just takes me back to a quote I've said on the show many times. One of my teachers back in school, when we bitch and moan about limitations on projects and assignments, he said, your limitations are your creative starting points. Once you know what you can't do, everything else is possible. Go for it.
Yeah. Well, the project was a ton of fun because just from the get-go, the limitations were very obvious. I was confined to my apartment and my rooftop and whatever the eye can see within that range. Now, fortunately, my rooftop in Bushwick was a row house. So it's 17 interconnected apartments and roofs, which spans the length of almost an entire block. And because everything in Bushwick, besides the new high rises, are all about the same level, 4 stories for the most part, you can see for miles. So I had a telephoto lens. I got my hands on one as quickly as possible, and a 2x extender. And I could see for miles. I could see blocks and blocks. And even though it was just for my own rooftop, um, hundreds of people were in line of sight and line of communication. So there was a lot to do with a little bit of space.
When you said telephoto, what focal length were you using?
Yeah, I had a 100 to 400 millimeter with the 2x extender.
Oh, so you could see okay, that's good. Okay.
Yeah, you could see plenty. And of course, most of the work is shot on my rooftop or a roof 1 or 2 streets over. But just within that range, there's so much life. And this was also my excuse to get to know my community and meet all of my neighbors a little more intimately than I had before. And for those who lived in New York, there's sort of that trope of not knowing your neighbors, kind of living anonymously. And I think that's not how urban living ought to be. It's not how it always has been. And yeah, this was just my excuse to finally get to meet my neighbors and have these long conversations. And of course, when there's nowhere else to go and nothing else to do because you're in the height of the pandemic and quarantine, people are a little more generous with their time.
Now, I'm assuming that most of the rooftops up there they may not want you up there for all kinds of reasons, but were any of them like dangerous?
Yeah, so I'll say well, I don't know if you saw the last page of my book, but I did a little skateboard trick on the very edge of my roof. Like, you got to flirt with a little bit of danger for good work sometimes. Yeah, so most of the roofs didn't have an edge. There's parapets on some rooftops, which is like a quarter of a wall. It's usually 2 feet high. You could call it a guardrail, but in some ways it's actually scarier.
Aren't there laws about that? Isn't there a minimum height of a railing on any residence in New York City? I thought there was like a minimum 3.5 or 4 feet. Am I wrong about that?
So those are railings, but parapets are more of like a decorative element. And they're not intended for...
They're meant to keep the rain off your head when you're standing by the front door fumbling with your keys. Seriously, it was just a little bit of protection. That's all it was.
Yeah, on my rooftops, they had a parapet on one side, and on the other side, it was just a straight drop-off. So, it was definitely a navigation of like, how close could I comfortably stand leaning over the edge before I, and of course, shooting with a big camera, sometimes you're like walking around trying to get that perfect angle. I am proud to have made this project without falling off a roof. That was a consideration for sure.
Did you have rear view mirrors? When you have to be careful when you're backing up on rooftops. But
yeah, absolutely. And one thing that was kind of fun is there's a lot of communication between my neighbors and me. If there was one rooftop away, I could usually yell. If it wasn't windy, I could yell across 2 streets over. And if not, there was always using friends that I'd made on an intermediary rooftop to reach further out people. But, we kind of naturally developed these locations where it was the closest geographic distance between their rooftop and mine, like the closest points, so that we could talk. And it was fun trying to like establish those points, navigating when you both wanted to go into those places to, actually have a formal conversation and chat versus, just the typical wave and move on. And, when one person goes to the spot or seems to be gesturing to go to the spot and the other person doesn't reciprocate, it feels a lot like when you go for the handshake and someone goes for the fist bump. There's a little bit of a playing off that has to be done. And fortunately, I always had the camera to lean on as the crutch to distract from that. Oh, yeah, I was just going for another photo.
Were all landlords amiable to all of this? I imagine that some landlords were not real happy about people going up in the roofs for again, insurance reasons and everything else that goes on up there. I know that Jill is on the top floor of a building in Lower Manhattan, and she could tell you stories. And that as a teenager, I was on the top floor of a building in Brooklyn, and I could tell you some of my own stories. So did you get any pushback from tenants or landlords?
Yeah. So my landlord originally had a lock on our hatch to get onto the rooftop. And of course, there's a wide range of entry points. Some of these nicer buildings have a nice flight of stairs that leads you right up, and it's sold as an amenity. My building had a sloppy piece of wood with nails sticking out of it to cover up the hatch, which a ladder leads up to. And a lock was placed on it with the combination set to 0000. So fortunately, I was able to crack the code and gain access. But the landlords obviously are not necessarily the most keen on this.
Yeah, for good reason. My roof started leaking one rainy day recently because of all the people that have walked on the roof over the years.
Yeah, there's a crazy history of how the roofs have been used. So, like, one of the central characters, I'd say, in my book, and one of my closest friends during this project were the pigeon fanciers, Gil and Rick, who have had a pigeon coop with 1,000 pigeons on the apartment next to mine for decades now.
Right.
And of course, this is a relic of old New York. There were once hundreds and hundreds of coops all across Brooklyn, and now there's dozens, sort of a dying art. Yeah, they had a relationship with the landlord, exchanged handyman work in exchange for being able to have this space. But of course, they're sort of the watch guards of the rooftop, and they're the ones that clean it and care for it and are up there every day. And they have a very different relationship from the people that just come up to like drink beers and leave a mess. And you see all sorts of uses on the roofs.
It's interesting. I was curious to know about the pigeon coops. I know my mother grew up in Bensonhurst. My grandparents lived there, and I used to visit. And it's one of the first things I would notice as we came in towards the area where they lived is all the pigeons and the pigeon coops. And you look up on the roof and you'd see them all there. And that was really a big part of Brooklyn culture for the long time. And Lower Manhattan, not just Brooklyn, but anywhere where you had a lot of immigrants coming in, especially from Italy and those areas, they were really big on that stuff. And it was a hobby and it was a love that they had for these birds. But you just see these swarms of birds all over the place. And they weren't wild. They were owned. They came home at the end of the day and they stayed in their roosts. And you're right. The people who took care of the pigeons, they were also keeping an eye on the neighborhood. They were basically surveillance. They were up on the roof watching what was going on there. You want to know what was going on? Ask the guy who has pigeons. You'll know what's going on.
What did you learn about your neighborhood from the pigeon fancier guys?
Everything. I mean, the entire history of Bushwick. There was many a beer had. And I think one of the most interesting things was talking to them about gentrification and how Bushwick's been changing over the years. And they have this attitude of being more tolerant than you'd expect as these Puerto Ricans who've been living here for decades. I mean, Gil is in his 50s and he was born like a few blocks over. But they were talking about how in the 80s and the 70s, like the rooftops were a party and everyone would be on there and you actually see bottle caps
embedded
from those times. And like since then, they've really quieted down. Like it's a lot more tame. But they talk about how people don't have the same respect for the neighborhood anymore. And people are more likely to just be coming and going for 6 months, a year. And with that creates a sort of like, not treating it with the same love that you would if you know that this is your home. And that's really sad to hear about.
So, Josh, you created this code of conduct at one point because of sort of the tentative nature of your photographing other people and the issue of permission. Can you describe how that worked and why you felt the need to sort of codify it into a written document?
Absolutely. So this was like a major turning point in the project where for a while it was just this sort of casual thing, taking photos every day. I mean, I was very committed to it from the beginning. But there was this reckoning where there was another photographer. And I guess quick context, like if you want to talk about limitations for one more moment, in the beginning of the pandemic, there were two things that every photographer in New York was shooting. It was empty streets or rooftops.
Right.
This was not a unique project. So many other people were doing this. So there was another photographer in our neighborhood who was doing this from one of the high rises. And because of their vantage point, they weren't able to have the same conversations with everyone that I was able to have. And yeah, as a result, some people got really upset and felt that they were being taken advantage of. And they posted this sign, asked for consent. It was like a protest against this guy. And I had the opportunity to photograph them and have long conversations with them about how to approach this respectfully. And fortunately, like, we were on really great terms because we had been talking about this from the beginning. But from that moment on, I realized that I needed to step my game up and make sure that everyone felt really good about it. Just because I think there's like multiple layers of consent. There's when you take their photo the first time and maybe they give you a thumbs up after and you're cool with having taken that candid photo. Then there's taking it again. When you see them the next day, how long does this approval last? And of course, then there's posting these photos on the internet. And a big part of this project was like, this isn't the old school approach of hold on to this big body of work and then drop it. This was take photos, post them that evening or the next day, and this continuous project. And as the project gained momentum, more and more people would see it. And if there was someone who was too far for me to communicate with, or just never got to talk with, they might find their image by being tagged on it online, which happened many a time. And like, ultimately, I created this code of conduct to try to shift the power dynamic of being a photographer. So rather than I take the photo, I'm in control, it was actually a rule of ethics where I said, I'm going to try to always talk to people, represent the neighborhood well. And if I'm not able to talk to you and you see yourself online, you have the right to ask me to take it down, and I'll happily oblige. And I'll send you the photos too, and I'll thank you for them. So what I was trying to do was just shift it and say, you guys are in control, and I only get to do this project for as long as my neighbors appreciate and are happy to be a part of it. And honestly, it was a really exciting turning point when people started to have more. They trusted me further. And when I met someone new, I could send them this. And it built a lot of trust. I was, of course, scared that everyone would yank access and say, this guy sucks. But fortunately, people were trusting, and it meant a lot.
And when it came to publishing, did you actually get permission from all of the people in your photographs to publish them in the book?
I would say 95%. Wow. Everyone that I could possibly talk to, of course, absolutely. But then there are still a few people that were one rooftop over and just, never got to speak with. So someone might be flipping through a bookstore in 2024 and see their face and be like, oh, I didn't know this existed. And I look forward to the strange email that they'll be sending me.
Josh, I just want to make one little personal statement about your book. It reminds me of the original posters from the original West Side Story movie and shows. It's got the vibe is from that time, and it's wonderfully graphic, strong shapes, shadows, and colors and stuff like that. And I mean that as a compliment. It's good stuff. That said, we are going to take a little bit of a breather here, a short break. And when we come back, we'll delve into the gear, the Josh's photographic processes, and book publishing. Stay tuned.
Ensure high-quality audio for your podcasts and gaming streams with the Logitech G Yeti GX microphone while simultaneously stylizing your frame with the full RGB spectrum. This dynamic Yeti GX USB capsule mic rejects noise, prevents clipping, reduces keyboard clicks, and adds effects and filters using Blue Voice software, ensuring clear, consistent sound. To jazz up your visuals, the dual-zone LEDs on the mic's base allow you to customize light-sync RGB accent lighting. And as part of the Logitech G ecosystem, the Yeti GX can sync with other Logitech G products using the G Hub application. Head on over to bnh.com for more information about the Logitech G series or use the link in our podcast show notes.
Okay, we are back. Now let's start talking about gear and book publishing, which is really the nitty-gritty of it. You can take all the pictures you want. but you got to have the right gear. And if you want to do a book, you have to know how to do that as well. So let's start off with Joshua, and let's talk about gear. What cameras and lenses did you work with for this project? And what about lighting? Did you do anything with artificial lighting, LED flash, or was it all available? How'd you work?
So I used a Sony A7R II as the camera body.
Mm-hmm.
And I used a mix of the Sony 16 to 35 millimeter and a 2470. I really wanted to take a documentary approach for these photographs and make sure I was able to capture these wide shots that could show you how vast these spaces were, all the personality that the artists have put and infused into their homes over the decades, and of course the artists too. My main interest was capturing these wide shots of the spaces.
It's environmental portraiture is what you're doing. You're doing a portrait of a person in their environment, and that's exciting stuff, especially if it's a good environment.
Exactly. And it's so hard to capture what it feels like to be in one of these lofts. I know Jill and Alan, you both have been inside of them, and it's otherworldly when you step inside. So it really became a goal to try and capture just a little bit of that feeling in the photographs. When I first started the project, I intended, and my flyer says this, I intended to only use natural light because I wanted to emulate how these big windows would allow light into the space. And I did it for the first few people. And I even shared the photos with Josh Katz. And I came to the conclusion that a lot of these lofts are either full floors or half floors. And what happens is you get this beautiful light right by the windows. But in the middle of the loft, it's much darker because you're further away.
It falls off quickly. And our eyes adapt a lot more easily to the transition and going from bright to dark than any digital imaging will without a lot of manipulations. Yeah, you need to shoot with a graduated filter, if anything. Did you do that?
I didn't use a graduated filter, but what I did do is I got a Godox V1, just a small light, so that when I was shooting the darker areas of the loft, I was able to capture these details. And it's something I also spoke to Katz about is, what's a light that I'm able to keep a small footprint and still get what I need in these spaces to capture all the details. So something that was important to me is can I fit all this gear in a backpack? Because I would be spending an 8-hour day ringing doorbells. Maybe I would meet someone and photograph them. Maybe I would meet someone and get an email. So it had to be something that I could keep on my back and walk around the neighborhood in. So I just had the one Godox and my camera.
Wow. 20 years ago, you couldn't do that. Well, you could, but your backpack would be a lot larger. No, that's one of the beauties of the past few years. I'm amazed of how the size of lighting has come next. I used to drag around, several thousand watt seconds of electronic flash in several big cases, and I'm blown away by what one can do today with much smaller gear and better accessories and everything else. So that was definitely running in your favor there.
Absolutely. No, it is incredible. And for some of the shoots, I was able to also bring along cinematographers who would shoot behind the scenes video and also help me capture interviews with all the different artists.
I was going to ask you about that. Sure. Okay. All right. So that's how okay. Good enough. So you didn't just bring Josh with you wherever you went, right?
No, just the spirit of me bullying him into buying a flash. That's all.
Did you do your stills and the video at the same time, or were they separate sessions?
So the way the process worked is usually I would meet someone first, and then the second time I would come and take photographs. So I would get to the loft. One of the greatest parts about this project is almost every artist offered me a cup of coffee when I first got in. And they would all make them in different ways. Some would have the French press, some would do it on the stove. This is a total lost art of our generation, is that I don't think that we offer people coffee when they first come in. And it's something that I've now added to my life when I have friends over during the day. But after we would share a cup of coffee, I would shoot photographs for about 45 minutes. And then after the photographs were all done, we would sit down, the cinematographer would compose a frame, and then I would interview the artist about their time living at the loft, their neighborhood, and their artwork. And that's usually how it went. There were a few times where I returned, but we would try to do everything within about 2 hours.
What was the video footage? What cameras were you using for that?
It was a mix. I personally have a Sony FX9, so sometimes I would have friends shoot on that. I had a wonderful cinematographer named Daniel Chang, who probably went to 10 or 15 different lofts with me, and he used his Sony FX6. So it was usually one of those cameras that was capturing the video.
You mentioned the coffee service and all that, and there's actually, aside from the fact that it's a nice thing to do, it just makes it more homey. It serves another purpose, and that is, I think, one of the worst things you can do, unless you're under extreme time restraints, is to show up to do portraits of any type, set up and just start shooting. It's so much more important to establish a rapport with your subject, especially if you don't know them from a hole in the wall, and get to know and warm up. And that's what that cup of coffee really serves in me. And it's a great vehicle to employ whenever you can, sit down, talk. And like that, when you do start taking pictures, there's a relationship going on there. It's a whole different feel, different karma to the whole thing. So that has a lot to do with it.
I totally agree with you, Alan. And the big challenge of a project like this is I photographed 75 different artists. So I can't spend a month following this artist and capturing their life. I really only get these short windows. So even that 20, 30 minutes of sharing a cup of coffee made a huge difference in the comfortability level of when we were shooting the portraits.
Josh Katz, what about your gear?
Yeah, I was shooting on a Canon 6D Mark II at the time and using a 24-105 f4 Canon L series lens along with the Canon 100-400 with the 2x extender, which is what a miracle of a tool that extender is.
Oh, yeah. Yes, absolutely. Many years ago, we got a used 1200 millimeter Canon lens, and they only made about 18 of these things. It took a year and a half to build each one. Only one guy was able to make the glass, an old Japanese optician. He'd hand grind the glass. And we got one in used, and it sold for like $80,000. But before we sold it, we took it up on the roof of B&H, and we aimed it up 9th Avenue. And it was pretty impressive. It took 2 people to mount on a tripod, this beast. But we were on 35th and 9th, and we aimed it up 9th Avenue, and we were focusing on buildings around 55th Street, a good mile up, okay? And I could describe paintings on people's walls.
Wow.
Yeah, it's insane.
I never knew about that.
It's really...
Yeah, we called it the mother of all telephotos. It was pretty impressive lens. It was just crazy. It was totally impractical. But anyway,
yeah. And now Canon, they put out the new 1200, and it's a little bit smaller.
Oh, a lot smaller and a lot cheaper and everything else. But some people got to carry the big guns. That's what impresses people.
Yeah, I prefer to spend $80,000 on my lenses personally.
Why not? You can deduct it at the end of the year. So publishing now, that's a whole other thing. Now, let's talk about that a little bit. Now, Josh Katz, you funded New York in quarantine using Kickstarter, and then you got an agent, Myrsini Stefanides, I believe her name is. She's from the ARC Literary Management Company, and you got that through a cold email that you sent. Tell us a little bit more about publishing and how you got ultimately a deal with Thames and Hudson, which is a terrific publisher who we've gotten a lot of wonderful books and leads from them.
Yeah, it was a dream come true, and it felt like a long shot, honestly. I would say that publishing is one of the more gate-kept spaces in the arts. If you want to make a movie, you make a YouTube channel. If you want to make a book, you can absolutely self-publish, and it's a beautiful way to do it. But when I was first making the book, the plan was to self-publish. I didn't think it would be possible to land a publisher, and I was just excited to make it. But I decided when an initial prospective partnership kind of fell through with the early publisher, let's just throw the thing up on Kickstarter and see what happens. And I quickly learned that you can't casually do a Kickstarter. This was more like 14-hour days for 2 months straight with no days off, just working like crazy to both design the book at the time and also convince everyone I've ever met and the entire internet that this is a project worth believing in. And yeah, the Kickstarter was a big hit. And we raised a ton of money. Of course, a big chunk of this went to charity. I should also add that, so I was really frustrated by how a lot of companies were running during the pandemic with their charity initiatives. They'd always say, oh, and because things are hard, a percentage of proceeds will go to a charity of this choice. And a percentage of proceeds, come on, that means they donated once. So I decided if I'm going to make a big major project, I wanted to do it right and not be like a pandemic profiteer. So I decided to donate 100% of the profits to Doctors Without Borders. And that also, I think, helped bring a lot of trust in all of the subjects, believing in the project and being willing to be a part of it. It just showed that, it was a little bit, I didn't want to make it too selfish. Of course, making a hardcover photo book will always be somewhat selfish, but there were some good elements to it as well.
Yeah, it's really funny you say it. Look, it's definitely good for the ego. And yeah, it's sometimes I wonder myself, am I taking pictures for me or of everybody else, and it's an interesting point that you have there. But I would say that by committing to that, you definitely give a whole new meaning to the book and a whole new purpose to the book. And it's really noble and a great cause. It really, really is. No two ways about that.
Thank you. And I guess just to bring it back to the original question, once the book had done well on Kickstarter, then I decided, I was ready to print it. I had committed to a timeline for all the backers of when it would be out. And I had a printer picked out. I was actually about to press the button to submit the order for 1,000 books. And I said, you know what? Let's send a few emails and see what happens.
Wow.
And Mercini was one of the few agents that hit me back. And she said, I never respond to cold calls. Rarely do they actually have anything worth responding to. But I cried reading your book, and I want to work with you. So we pitched it out, and the rest is history.
How long did it take from her signing on to the project to getting an offer from Thames and Hudson?
It was maybe 2 or 3 months. And there was a little bit of courting and conversations to be had. And the other kind of funny element of this was that I ran the Kickstarter in November of 2020 with the intention of shipping books out by January or February of the next year. And when Mercini and I were sending out these queries and getting a little bit of interest from a number of publishers, suddenly the timeline was shifted back tremendously.
Yeah.
It was from maybe a month delayed and a rejection to what happened to be almost a year later, and a dream publisher. They were just amazing to work with, and having to handle all of these backers who they were the first people to believe in this book. Before it was the very official looking project that's now in all these bookstores. It was a dinky photographer that they put trust into, and I, of course, couldn't tell them that I'm negotiating with one of the most respected publishers, and that things are happening. So I had to, just kind of keep people in the dark a little bit, which was really tough. But in the end, I hope the ends justified the means.
Certainly.
You have our blessings. You do. Don't worry about it.
Well, then I'm good.
Joshua, let's turn back to you. And what was your process for finding a publisher? What was your journey like?
Sure. So firstly, I have to say, I don't know if this book would exist without Josh Katz, because I started this project towards the end of him finishing his. And as a close friend, he was able to basically show me the roadmap of how you get from idea to a finished book. And like he said, it's really hard to understand how that works without someone in your life who can show you the steps you have to take.
Especially somebody who's already made the mistakes that you don't want to have to make and learn from.
Yes. And someone with the same first name.
Oh, yeah. You got to be a Josh to make it in this industry.
So I spent about 2 years just taking photographs, not worrying about publisher or anything like that. And when I finally felt that I had enough stories, enough photographs to make a book out of this thing, I spoke to Josh Katz. He, of course, gave me his agent's contact. And then I actually spoke to a former guest of the show, Vicky Toback.
So, oh, yeah, sure.
Yeah, so I was a big fan of Contact High, and we had a mutual friend. So she also sat down with me and was kind enough to connect me with some agents. And she connected me to my agent, J.L. Sturmer at Next Level Lit. And that was last spring. So we spent a few months on the pitch. We sent it out to all the different publishers, and we signed a deal with Damiani at the end of the summer.
Interesting.
That's amazing. So to both of you guys, once you got the deal with the publisher, and I know Josh Katz, you had the book totally designed. how much creative control did you have over the publishing aspect and the final product? Did they go with what you had designed or what you had in mind, or were there changes made?
And if they did changes, we were happy with them.
Katz, I'll let you go first.
Yeah. Working with a publisher was a dream come true. I was working with Elizabeth Keene at Thames and Hudson, and she is incredible. I would say they just supercharged everything I was doing. The original art direction was by my designer, Eddie, and he's amazing. We worked with him post-publisher as well to keep expanding. So the whole direction was just like continued and amplified in a really wonderful way. And the writing was better than it would have been. And having a professional editor, besides my two friends who I also worked with for the entire time onto, the final publish. But it was amazing getting to work with a publisher, and that level of professionalism of making a great book and bringing on an incredible author, Ruman Alam, to write the intro that still gives me the chills every time I read it. Stuff like that. It was such a treat to get to work with Thames.
That's really a lucky story.
On my end, it was a bit different, actually. Damiani gave me pretty much full creative control for the inside of the book. So I worked with the designer, Alex Patterson-Jones, to design the inside of the book. And the text was edited by Zara Van Gaal and Kayla Herr. And I basically delivered them the inside of the book, and they gave a thumbs up. The only thing that we went back and forth on was the cover. So we went through a few different options, and they gave input and I gave input, and we landed on something that we both felt good about. I will say the coolest part about working with Damiani is I had the opportunity to go to the printing press in Bologna, Italy.
Nice.
And it was a life-changing experience. We spent 3 days on the press with their printer, Lorenzo, who's printed all of their books for the past 30 years. And
wow.
Oh my goodness, we got to go through, basically the way it worked is they print out sheets of 8 separate pages, and we would adjust the CMYK levels of each sheet. So we did that for about 3 days straight. And then on the 4th day, I'd already said my goodbyes to Lorenzo. I thought we were all finished. And I got an email with the subject line, tortellini ? And it was from Lorenzo. And he said, "What are you doing today?" And I told him I was planning to finally see the city. And he said, "Instead, would you like to come over to my mother's house?" So I went to Lorenzo's 89-year-old mother's apartment in Bologna, and she cooked us some fresh tortellini. So it wasn't in the book deal, but it was quite the perk.
Could we do a show on that? I just on that dinner.
Better yet, let's all go to Bologna.
and by the way, it's something also, if anyone's going to be considering going into book publishing or trying to have their book published, brace yourself, because you're going to have to be open, and it pays to be open to the opinions of others, because even though we think we understand our work better than anybody else, it's amazing what a good sensitive editor, and that's picture or text, can do to make your work that much better. You often need a set of fresh eyes that are not jaded, and just fresh eyes just to see things. And it sounds like both of you guys lucked out in that sense, that you had spare sets of eyes to go over things and to look, and you're able to come to a common ground where it worked, for you, and made everybody happy. And the end products are good. That's the bottom line.
Thank you. Yeah, it was a great process, truly.
What I think is really wonderful is that both of you guys working together as well as individually, you're able to pull this off and make it all happen. Look, so many people talk about, I'm working on this project, it's so good, I'm going to do a book. But what percentage of people actually see it through, especially when they realize what's involved in getting a book done? I'm working on a book project it's actually a year now. And, I thought it'd be out on the shelves by now. No, it's not. It's still in development. It's still being worked on. I'm still fine-tuning it and getting new pieces to it. But it is a big undertaking to do, and it's got to be immensely satisfying to actually get this book out and hold it in your hands and say, wow, I did it. I pulled it off. It makes it, I hate to say credible, your work, but when you are able to publish your work or see your photographs published in another publication, it just adds a nice bit of validity to it, and it's just great for the ego, and there's nothing wrong with stroking one's ego every now and then. It's okay.
They say that photo books are the most expensive business card you'll ever print.
Excellent. 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 Yeah. And probably stupider to undertake than buying a boat. But that's a whole other subject. Anyway, wonderful talking with you guys. They're very refreshing, great upbeat conversation. Josh Katz, what are you up to now, and what kind of projects are you working on?
Yeah, I am actually working on another book right now. It's a tourism study about Hawaii and America's relationship with the island. And I'm also running a skateboarding video database with a handful of engineers and a designer. It's a little bit of a deviation from my photography, but I'm a lifelong skateboarder. And I have now found myself telling stories and doing a lot of journalism now in the skateboarding space. And who knows, it might get tied back to photography eventually.
I love it. That's great. Joshua C., what about yourself? What do you have in the works? What are you cooking up in the meantime?
Yeah, so Loft Law is actually only being released on April 16th. So the next few months are all the events surrounding the release. We are doing a book signing at the Strand Bookstore on April 25th at 7 p.m. And as you mentioned in the intro, I'm so excited that we're doing a gallery exhibition of the photographs alongside physical artworks from some of the artists that I photographed in the book. So that'll be at the Westwood Gallery, opening on May 16th for about a month and a half. And that's over on the Bowery.
Ground zero for that world.
Yeah.
That's great. I'm actually kind of looking forward to that show. I'd like to catch that one myself. All of this, by the way, will be in our show notes. Josh Katz, people want to catch up with more of your work. Where should they go?
Yeah, they can go to my Instagram. It's just Josh Katz. They can go to my website. It's joshkatz.me. All the places on the internet you'd expect to find me, I'm there.
That's great. And Joshua Charow, what about yourself? People want to catch up with what you're up to. Where can they go to?
They can also go to Instagram. So my Instagram is Joshua Charow, and I'm also on YouTube as Josh Charow, and my website, joshuacharow.com.
Excellent. And again, all of these links will be in our show notes, and I strongly urge all of our listeners to follow up on this work. There's some fun projects going on there. And again, Josh and Joshua, CNK, both of you, thank you again for joining us today. Terrific, and best of luck with upcoming projects.
Thanks so much for having me. This was a blast.
Thank you both.
Yeah, thank you.
And thank you guys for joining us as always. If you're a fan of the show, but not yet a subscriber, head on over to Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts and click subscribe. You can also find us on the Explorer blog where we post photos from our guests and show notes. And please join us on Facebook at the B&H Photography Podcast group where you can share your favorite photos and comments about the show. I'm your host, Alan Weitz. Jill Waterman is our creative producer. Episodes are recorded, mixed, and edited by technical producer Mike Weinstein. Our executive producer is Bjorn Peterson, and our editorial director is Sean Steiner. On behalf of everybody, thank you oh so much for tuning in today.
Thanks to Logitech for sponsoring this week's episode.